You think you have everything under control, your career, your reputation, your future, until one moment shatters it all. One look, one mistake, one connection you can't undo. Now you're standing between everything you built, and the one person who makes it all feel meaningless. If you want to see what happens when control collides with desire and truth refuses to stay hidden, stay till the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Her wink had no right to survive the night. It belonged to dim lights, loud music, and the reckless blur of strangers who never expect to meet again. It should have dissolved somewhere between neon reflections and the last trace of sweat on skin. Instead, it arrived before I did, slipping through the glass doors of the boardroom and settling into the space like it owned it. She sat at the head of the table in charcoal precision, composed in a way that made the room feel smaller, thinner, harder to breathe in. When her eyes lifted from the folder and met mine, something inside me faltered. It wasn't recognition. Recognition would have been easier. This was anticipation, sharp and unwelcome. And when she spoke my name as if it had never lived anywhere but a formal introduction, I understood immediately that the day would not be kind. By the time she finished presenting her vision, the room responded with approval. But all I could hear was the steady climb of my own pulse. I kept my expression intact, practiced and neutral, director of brand strategy, recently promoted, reliable, controlled, no cracks, no slips. Still, she knew. It was there in the slight curve of her mouth when our eyes met again, a subtle signal meant for me alone. Only hours earlier, her fingers had traced my jaw in the shadowed corner of a bar where names felt unnecessary. Now those same hands moved with calm authority, guiding a presentation, pointing at projections. When she winked, barely noticeable, gone in an instant, it felt like standing on an edge with nothing to hold on to. I have built everything on control. My schedule is precise, my work deliberate, my composure unshakable. I earned this position through years of discipline, through weekends sacrificed and ideas forced into shape with persistence and caffeine. Last night was supposed to be an exception, a brief, careless moment carved out of restraint. I stepped out alone, let myself drift, let someone pull me into something unplanned. I did not expect that pull to follow me into morning, Cameron Vale. The name carried weight when the board introduced her. I repeated it silently, trying to align it with the woman I had met in the dark. Then she had been warmth, quiet laughter, instinct. In daylight she was something else entirely, sharp, deliberate, composed as if authority had always belonged to her. She spoke of innovation, of direction, of growth. But when her gaze returned to me, it shifted, softening just enough to fracture the illusion. Just enough to remind me of the way she had asked me to stay when I tried to leave before sunrise. The meeting blurred at the edges after that. Charts and figures lost meaning. I focused on breathing, on posture, on stillness. Nothing more, nothing less. When it ended, people gathered in polite clusters, voices blending into background noise. I collected my things, ready to leave before anything slipped. Then her voice cut through, calm and measured, asking me to stay. It sounded routine. It wasn't. The room emptied quickly. The door closed with a quiet finality that seemed louder than it should have been. Her presence shifted as she stepped closer. Not enough to cross a line, but enough to remind me how thin that line was. "Good morning, Miss Cole." The formality felt unfamiliar after everything that had passed between us hours before. "Good morning, Ms. Vale." Silence followed, charged rather than empty. She glanced toward the glass wall, ensuring privacy, then spoke more quietly. "We should treat this as if it never happened." The words were reasonable, necessary. They still landed with a sharp edge. I agreed before hesitation could surface. It was the logical choice. Clean, controlled, safe. Yet her eyes lingered, searching beneath the surface of that agreement. For a moment, the memory of the night flickered between us, unspoken but present. Then she straightened, drawing herself back into the role she carried so effortlessly. As I moved toward the door, ready to step back into a version of reality that made sense, she said my name again, just my name this time. Softer, unguarded. I turned. For an instant, the composure slipped, and the woman from the night before stood in its place. Real, unfiltered. "This complicates things," she admitted. It did. More than either of us was willing to say. I should have reinforced the distance, should have made the boundary absolute. Instead, I held her gaze, fully aware that whatever this was, it wouldn't fade quietly. By the next morning, I arrived early, determined to restore order. Coffee in hand, composure firmly in place, I told myself the past belonged in a sealed space, disconnected from everything that mattered. The office moved as it always did, efficient, focused, predictable. I almost believed I had succeeded in separating it all. Then the calendar notification appeared. Strategy review. Her office, the illusion fractured instantly. Her office sat at the end of the corridor, all glass and open skyline, a space designed to reflect clarity and control. When I stepped inside, she didn't look up right away. She finished what she was doing first, deliberate and unhurried. Only then did she meet my eyes. "Director Cole, please, sit." The meeting unfolded as expected on the surface. Timelines, expansion plans, performance metrics. She asked precise questions. I answered without hesitation. This was familiar ground, where confidence came naturally. And yet, something beneath it all refused to settle. Every small movement felt amplified. Every glance carried weight. When she complimented my work, the words held an undercurrent that had nothing to do with strategy. "You're impressive, Avery." It didn't sound like a professional observation. I reminded myself it was exactly that. The moment her fingers brushed mine as she adjusted the tablet, the illusion nearly broke. It lasted less than a second, but the impact lingered, sharp and immediate. We both pulled back into control, though not without effort. When she brought up the night, even indirectly, it cut through the structure we were maintaining. I responded with the agreement we had made, reinforcing distance with words that felt increasingly fragile. She observed me carefully, as if trying to understand how much of that distance was real. The meeting concluded, but neither of us moved. The air shifted again when she stepped closer, removing the physical barrier between us. "We need boundaries," she said quietly. It was the truth. It just didn't feel simple. I agreed. Even as the space between us made the word feel almost contradictory. "You deserve your position. I won't interfere with that." The statement was meant to reassure. Instead, it raised questions I didn't want to examine. "I don't need protection." A faint smile answered that, subtle but knowing. For a moment, everything balanced on a thin edge. Titles, hierarchy, expectations. All of it existed, but none of it fully defined what stood between us. In that narrow space, the sense of control I relied on no longer felt entirely mine, and that was the most dangerous part of all. "This can't happen again," she murmured, though the certainty in the words felt fragile, as if she were trying to convince herself more than me. The statement lingered between us. Less a rule and more a negotiation neither of us fully understood. I steadied myself before answering, aware that anything I said could tip the balance. "Then it won't," I replied, shaping the promise into something firm. I turned toward the door, ready to put distance where it belonged, but her hand caught my wrist before I could take a step. The touch wasn't forceful. It didn't need to be. It was deliberate, intentional, impossible to ignore. My breath faltered as my gaze dropped to her fingers, then lifted to her face. The composure she wore so effortlessly in the boardroom had thinned, revealing something far less controlled. "Avery," she said, "my name's stripped of formality, quiet and unguarded. Tell me this is easy for you." The words cut cleanly through everything we were pretending to maintain. A lie would have been simple, safe, expected. It didn't come. It isn't. Her grip loosened, but she didn't move away. For a suspended second, the distance we had carefully rebuilt dissolved again, and it became clear how effortless boundaries look in theory. How impossible they feel when the person in front of you still burns through every layer of restraint. By the time the office emptied that night, the building had taken on a different character, all sterile light and echoing silence, like a place meant for reflection rather than work. I stayed partly because there was work waiting, partly because leaving would have meant admitting I was trying to escape something I didn't fully understand. The glow of my screen cast a pale reflection against the dark windows, a version of me that appeared composed enough to pass inspection. Outside, the city moved with a life I wasn't participating in. I told myself I preferred that distance. The elevator broke the quiet with a sharp metallic sound, followed by footsteps that carried a familiarity I felt before I consciously recognized it. I didn't turn immediately. I didn't need to. The air shifted first, threaded with that same subtle, unmistakable scent. "You're still here," she said, her voice softer now, freed from the structure of authority. I rotated slowly in my chair, arranging my expression into neutrality. "Deadlines," I said, gesturing vaguely toward the screen. "They don't wait." Her smile was quieter than the one she used in meetings, less polished, more real. She stepped closer, stopping at the edge of my desk as if acknowledging an invisible boundary. Without her jacket, the sharpness of her professional image softened. Sleeves rolled, collar open, She looked less like a position and more like a person who had simply chosen not to leave. I could say the same, I admitted. First week doesn't exactly come with a schedule. Her gaze lingered, studying me with an intensity that felt less like curiosity and more like recognition. For a while, we spoke about safe things: markets, campaigns, projections, conversations that built structure without addressing what sat beneath them. At some point, she moved around the desk and took the chair beside mine instead of across from it. The shift erased distance in a way that felt immediate and undeniable. The quiet amplified everything. The rhythm of her breathing, the subtle tension in her posture. "You don't have to stay this late," she said gently. "Not to prove anything." A quiet laugh slipped out. "If I stop proving things, I start disappearing." The honesty landed heavier than intended, unfiltered and exposed. Her expression changed, sharpening with something closer to concern. "You don't seem like someone who disappears." "Not in a way you'd notice," I said, my attention drifting to the city lights beyond the glass. Silence settled again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She let it exist without filling it, and that restraint felt deliberate, almost kind. "I used to think everything would fall apart if I stopped pushing," she said after a moment, her voice lower, more personal. The admission shifted something between us. I turned toward her fully, seeing the fine fractures beneath her usual composure, the faint exhaustion, the guarded softness. "It didn't," she continued. "But I stopped trusting anyone enough to see me try." The honesty struck deeper than anything else had. This wasn't surface-level tension or passing attraction. It was something quieter, heavier. "That sounds lonely," I said before I could stop myself. "It is," she admitted, a faint, bittersweet curve touching her lips. The space between us seemed to tighten, not physically but in awareness. My hand rested on the desk between us, and I became acutely conscious of how little distance separated us. Her eyes dropped briefly to my fingers before lifting again, hesitation flickering in her expression. I didn't move. Neither did she. "Avery," she said, my name carrying weight this time, something closer to confession than address. Her fingers brushed mine, tentative, testing. The contact sparked instantly, sharp enough to steal breath. She didn't pull away, but she didn't press closer either, leaving the touch suspended, fragile. "We're not very good at boundaries," she said, almost apologetic. A quiet breath escaped me. That's one way to put it. Still, neither of us moved. The city lights reflected in the glass like distant constellations, and for a moment the office felt detached from everything beyond it. Her gaze flickered briefly to my lips, then returned to my eyes, uncertainty breaking through her control. "If I kissed you now," she said softly, "would you regret it?" The question settled heavily between us. I searched her face for anything that would make the answer easier. Distance, calculation, detachment. There was none, only sincerity. "Yes," I said quietly. The shift in her expression was immediate, something like hurt crossing it. I didn't let it linger, but not for the reason you think. She inhaled, moving closer, the air between us narrowing to almost nothing. The moment stretched, fragile and electric, her lips hovering just within reach. And then the sharp vibration of my phone shattered it completely. The next day, rain turned the city into blurred motion, glass and light dissolving into streaks of gray. Traffic crawled through flooded streets, trapping us in the back of the car, with nowhere to redirect the tension that had followed us from the night before. She was composed again, every detail of her demeanor precise, controlled. If not for the memory of how close we had come, it might have been convincing. But there were cracks, small ones, a glance that lingered too long, a softness that surfaced and vanished before it could be acknowledged. "You didn't answer your phone," she said at last, her tone even but carrying something beneath it. "I know." Silence returned, dense and charged. The car moved forward only to stop again, the rhythm of motion doing nothing to ease the atmosphere between us. "We should talk about it," she said quietly. "There's nothing to talk about," I replied too quickly. My name, when she said it, sounded less like authority and more like concern. The driver's voice interrupted, apologetic, explaining that the road ahead was impassable. We stepped out into the rain, umbrellas opening against wind that made them nearly useless. Under the narrow shelter of an awning, we stood closer than either of us intended. Rain struck the pavement around us, loud and relentless. When a sudden gust pushed sideways, her hand found my elbow, steadying me without hesitation. The touch was practical, grounded. It still sent something unsteady through me. The contact sent a sharp current through me, sudden enough to steal the air from my lungs. "Careful," she said, her voice lowered to survive the rain. I nodded, though neither of us moved away. The umbrella shifted in her grip, dipping just enough to draw us closer, our shoulders brushing. The faint warmth of her body cut through the damp chill, her perfume blending with rain and something undeniably human. Every instinct in my mind insisted this was a mistake. My body refused to agree. "We can't keep pretending nothing is happening," she said, her words nearly lost beneath the storm. Water clung to her lashes, softening her in a way that felt almost disarming, like the woman from the night before slipping through the edges of the one she showed the world. I searched for something measured, something safe, and found nothing. "What do you want me to say?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Say you don't feel it." The challenge hung between us, impossible to meet. I felt it in the way my pulse reacted to her closeness, in the way everything narrowed until there was only her, the rain, and the unbearable awareness of how little space remained between us. Silence answered for me. Something shifted behind her eyes, a decision settling into place. Her free hand lifted, hesitating for the briefest moment before brushing a damp strand of hair away from my face. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent, and it undid something in me. My breath caught, my chest tightening with the instinct to lean into her touch. "Avery," she said again, softer now, as though the name itself carried weight. The umbrella lowered further, closing us into a small, dim world carved out of rain and shadow. When she kissed me, there was no urgency in it, no recklessness. It was careful, deliberate, as if she were asking even as she crossed the line. Her lips were warm despite the cold around us, steady against mine. For a single suspended heartbeat, I didn't move, caught between surprise and inevitability. Then something inside me loosened, giving way. I kissed her back with the same quiet intention. The world beyond us dissolving into sound and motion that no longer mattered. It wasn't like before. There was no rush, no fleeting heat. This was something deeper, something that settled instead of burned, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with being seen, and everything to do with how right it felt. A car splashed through a flooded stretch of road nearby, breaking the moment apart. We stepped back too quickly, breath uneven, the rain suddenly cold against skin that felt overheated. Her eyes searched mine, wide and unguarded, as though she had crossed a line she couldn't redraw. "That was a mistake," she said, her voice rough, though nothing in her expression agreed. I started to respond, but movement at the edge of my vision stopped me. Under a neighboring awning, a figure stood still, phone lowered slowly, their gaze fixed on us with unmistakable recognition. Someone from the office. Someone who had seen everything. The storm around us faded in comparison to the one that realization carried. Rumors didn't arrive all at once. They seeped in quietly, spreading through the office in subtle shifts and unfinished conversations. By Monday morning, voices cut off just a second too late when I approached. Screens changed too quickly. Eyes slid away with practiced indifference. No one said anything directly, but the absence of words spoke loudly enough. I caught fragments of my name in hushed tones, pieced together from overheard whispers and careful glances. I told myself it might mean nothing. Offices thrived on speculation. But when a meeting request from human resources appeared without warning, denial became impossible to maintain. The conference room felt deliberately neutral, as if its blandness could absorb tension. The woman across from me spoke with precise care, every word measured, concerns regarding professional boundaries, not accusations. "Not yet," I responded evenly, or close enough to it, holding on to composure by habit alone. She framed it as a reminder, as policy, as procedure. But the meaning was clear. When I left, my hands trembled enough that I had to press them flat against my sides to hide it. The hallway felt longer than usual, every step carrying the weight of something shifting beneath me. I avoided the executive corridor entirely. I didn't want to see her door, didn't want to know whether she was inside, unaffected, untouched by the same quiet fallout. That possibility stayed with me longer than anything else. She found me before I could leave. Her voice stopped me mid-motion, my laptop half-packed. I turned slowly, the sight of her tightening something in my chest that hadn't settled since the rain. "We need to talk." The words were controlled, stripped of warmth, carefully constructed. I followed her without argument. Her office felt colder than usual, the wide windows reflecting a sky that had lost all softness. She stood near the glass, arms crossed, posture rigid, as if distance could be maintained through sheer will. "Adder spoke to you, not a question." They did. They spoke to me as well. The confirmation shifted something inside me. This wasn't isolated. Whatever this was, it had reached both of us. "We can't continue this," she said, each word deliberate, final. "Continue what?" I asked, though the answer was already clear. Her eyes closed briefly before she answered. "Whatever this is." The space between us felt smaller, heavier. "So that's it," I said, the calm in my voice fragile enough to break. "One warning and you walk away." Her expression flickered, something real surfacing before discipline forced it back under control. "I'm protecting you." The words hit harder than anything else could have. I didn't ask for protection. I asked for honesty. Silence followed, dense and unresolved. She took a step forward, then stopped, as though the boundary she had drawn held her in place. "Honesty is exactly what puts your career at risk," she said quietly. "If this becomes known, you lose credibility, opportunities, everything you've worked for." The concern in her voice was genuine, so was the distance. "And what about you?" I asked, softer now. "Do you lose anything?" Her composure cracked then, just enough. "Yes," she said, her voice unsteady. "I lose you." The words came too late to change anything. They didn't soften the decision. They made it sharper, heavier, harder to accept. I looked at her fully then, committing the details to memory, the tension, the restraint, the vulnerability she couldn't completely hide. This was the same person who had held me close in the rain, who had chosen me in a moment without hesitation. Now she was choosing distance. "I'll request a transfer," I said quietly. The steadiness in my voice surprised even me. Her head lifted, surprise breaking through. "You don't have to do that. If this is over, I can't sit across from you pretending it doesn't matter. I'm not built that way." For a moment, it looked like she might argue, like she might fight for something different. Instead, she nodded once, a small motion that carried more weight than anything she could have said. "If that's what you need," not what she needed, what I needed. I turned toward the door before anything in my expression could betray me. My hand paused on the handle, waiting for her voice, for anything that might stop me. Nothing came. The silence pressed in, heavier than any words. And when I finally stepped out, it became clear that sometimes the loudest absence is the sound of someone choosing not to fight for you. Packing a life into cardboard carries a quiet kind of damage. Nothing dramatic, nothing visible from the outside. Just the slow drag of tape-sealing edges and the dull weight of things losing where they belong. By midday, my office felt hollow, as if the person who had filled it had already stepped out and left no trace behind. The framed certificate leaned against the wall, stripped of meaning without context. The plant I had kept alive for years sat by the window, still and expectant, waiting for care I wasn't sure I could give anymore. The transfer had gone through with unsettling speed. A different department, a different floor, a clean break executed with clinical precision. It was supposed to bring relief, distance, air that didn't carry her presence in it. That was the version I told myself. Anyway, I was sealing the last box when the shift in the room made itself known. A shadow stretched across the doorway. I didn't look up right away, unwilling to let expectation form into something that could disappoint me. "You're leaving today." Her voice had lost its polish, worn down at the edges, like it had been used too often without rest. I froze, the strip of tape hanging useless in my hand. Of course she knew. Nothing in that building moved without her awareness. When I finally looked up, the difference in her was immediate. Not disordered, not careless, but changed in small, unmistakable ways. No jacket, hair less precise, authority softened by something closer to urgency. "It seemed easier," I said, aiming for neutrality and landing somewhere closer to numb. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her with deliberate care, as though even the act of privacy required caution. Easier for who? There was no accusation in it, only something raw, for everyone. Her jaw tightened, frustration flickering beneath the surface she was struggling to maintain. Not for me. The admission stripped away whatever distance had been left between us. She moved further into the room, stopping near the boxes like they were evidence of something irreversible. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. A humorless breath left me. "You said we couldn't continue. This is what that looks like." Her eyes closed for a brief moment, as if the words carried weight she hadn't expected. When she opened them again, something had shifted, not softened, clarified. I was wrong. The simplicity of it struck harder than anything else could have. She had built her world on certainty, on control. Hearing her admit fault felt like watching something fundamental shift. "You weren't wrong," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. "You were practical." She shook her head, dismissing it. "I was afraid." The truth landed without warning, cutting cleanly through the space between us. She stepped closer, her gaze locked on mine with a vulnerability that felt almost too exposed to look at directly. Afraid of losing control, afraid of consequences, afraid of repeating things I've already learned the hard way. Her voice lowered, unsteady now. But mostly I was afraid of how much I want you. The words hit with enough force to undo everything I had tried to hold in place. My pulse surged, uneven and impossible to ignore. She closed the distance between us, stopping just short of contact, close enough that her presence pressed into my awareness. You asked what I would lose, she continued. I've been losing it since the moment you walked out of my office. Her eyes searched mine, not for permission this time, but for something real. I don't want control, she said, the admission trembling at its edges. I want you. Everything I had built over the past 2 days, distance, logic, self-preservation, collapsed under the weight of it. Pride felt insignificant. So did fear. You can't just say that and expect it to fix everything, I said softly, though the resistance in my voice was already fading. I know. Her hand lifted slowly, stopping just short of my face, giving me space to move away if I needed to. I didn't. Her fingertips brushed my cheek, light enough to feel like a question rather than a claim. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I just couldn't let you leave without telling you the truth. The gentleness of it unraveled something deeper than anything reckless ever could. It wasn't intensity that broke me. It was care. Emotion blurred my vision before I could stop it. I was trying to protect myself, I admitted, my voice unsteady. Because if I stayed and you decided again that I wasn't worth the risk, I couldn't finish. Her expression shifted completely, the last of her restraint giving way. You were never the risk, she said quietly. Losing you was. Her thumb brushed beneath my eye, catching the tear before it fell. The intimacy of the gesture made my breath hitch. We stood there among the remains of a life I had already started dismantling, surrounded by things left unsaid and decisions half made. What happens now? I asked, the question small but carrying everything. She exhaled slowly, as if grounding herself in what came next. Now I stop hiding. The words settled into me, steady and undeniable, igniting something that had felt out of reach since everything began to unravel. The boardroom looked exactly the same as it always had. Polished table, ordered chairs, a skyline that refused to acknowledge anything human happening behind the glass. It felt unfair that nothing in the room reflected what had changed. I sat halfway down the table, hands folded tightly, aware of every glance, every silence that stretched a second too long. She entered last, composed, as always. But lighter somehow, as if she had set something down that had been weighing on her for far too long. She didn't start with numbers or projections. Instead, she stood at her chair and looked around the room with quiet certainty. Before we continue, there's something I need to address. The shift in the room was immediate, subtle but unmistakable. I've entered into a personal relationship with an employee, no deflection, no careful wording. Just truth, placed plainly in a room designed to avoid it. A ripple moved through the room. Small reactions, controlled but present. To eliminate any conflict of interest, reporting structures will change effective immediately. Director Cole will no longer report to me. My attention snapped up despite myself. Her gaze met mine briefly, just enough to anchor me. This wasn't distance. It was intention. The meeting continued, returning to routine as though something extraordinary hadn't just been acknowledged. Conversations resumed, numbers discussed, decisions made, but none of it landed the same way. Relationship, not a mistake. Not an accident, something chosen. When it ended, people filed out with practiced composure, leaving behind the quiet aftermath of something deeply human exposed in a space that rarely allowed it. I lingered, unsure whether to leave or stay. She remained at the head of the table, finishing a quiet conversation. When the room finally emptied, her attention found me. You didn't have to stay, she said softly. I didn't know if I should go. She crossed the space between us, each step steady, stopping just within reach. I meant what I said, she told me. I'm not hiding you. The words settled into something that had been hollow for longer than I realized. You risked a lot. A small, genuine smile touched her expression. I didn't risk anything I wasn't already losing. This wasn't secrecy anymore. It wasn't something fragile or stolen. It was deliberate. She reached for my hand slowly, leaving space for hesitation. I didn't take it. Her fingers closed around mine, warm and certain, not demanding, just steady. Are you sure? I said quietly. There was no hesitation in her expression. I've built a life that looked perfect, she said, her thumb brushing lightly against my hand. None of it felt like this. Like what? She stepped closer, her free hand settling at my waist, the touch calm and unhurried. The last of my resistance gave way. I leaned into her, letting myself exist in the moment without pulling back, without fear. When I stepped away again, the city beyond the glass burned with late afternoon light, sharp and clear. Last night was an accident, she said. This is a choice. Warmth spread through me, steady and certain, dissolving the last remnants of doubt. We stood there, hands intertwined on the same table that had held our worst uncertainty, now holding something entirely different. No urgency, no secrecy, just the quiet certainty of something real. Outside, the city moved on, vast and indifferent. Inside, everything had narrowed to something smaller, something more meaningful. I had walked into that building afraid of losing everything. Instead, I found something I hadn't known how to want until it was already part of me. And as her hand tightened around mine, steady and unwavering, it became clear that some risks don't break you. Some finally let you breathe.